Welcome to the JMJ Commercial Realty Podcast. Dive into market insights, winning strategies, and the stories shaping today's commercial real estate landscape. Let's get started.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the JMJ Commercial Realty Podcast. I am Adam Schertzer. I'm a salesperson, advisor at JMJ Commercial Realty, and I'm joined as always by the broker and owner, Josh Cedia. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing well. Good morning, Adam. How are you?
Good, good. So today we're going to talk about keeping it simple. Sometimes with this job, you can get things that are too overly complicated that might get in the way of getting things done, and we're just going to go over a few things on how we keep things simple.
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
know
I was going to say, do you want to kind of give a quick background about JMJ, just for people they haven't listened for a while, and this is their first one?
we're going to just keep it simple and not even do that. No, we
Oh,
should.
there you go.
That's a good point. We got to do that more often. Yeah, do you want to give the background, who we are, what we do?
Sure. So JMJ Commercial Realty is a commercial real estate brokerage based in Needham, Massachusetts, and we help business owners and investors with commercial sales and leasing.
That is true. And we do also service New Hampshire. So
That's right.
make sure we throw that in there.
Yes.
Um, Awesome. So with that, let's get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today with keeping it simple. Just like, a meal of meat and potatoes is pretty simple. We got these three things here that we're going to talk about. First one on the list is evaluating property. I know this happens a lot, especially if someone's got something that they're looking to sell. Maybe they've had it in their family for many years and, they bought it for like three raspberries and a, row of corn back in like 1600s. And now they're like, well, what's this property worth? How do we get started with that?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. So evaluating properties, I think there's, at a high level, kind of looking at what's the opportunity here in terms of the income that a property produces. If we're talking about for an investor, for example,
Mhm.
and kind of look at the rents that come in for a gross amount, um, and then you have whatever expenses, subtract away the expenses, and you get to a net operating income. And then typically an investor will look at a cap rate and say, like, what kind of interest rate or what kind of return am I looking for here? And from that net operating income, you look at the cap rate, and then that comes up with at a high level, what type of price, that it could be. So I'm not saying that everything needs to be evaluated that way, but that's something that is, I think, a quick and easy way to look at this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think one of the first things working with some of our investor clients when we go see a property as an investment, asking for the rent roll and the expense sheet. Like you said, I think those are the two biggest things. And if they can make any money on this, and how much they're going to be making, which is, that cap rate you say. And then I think a lot of it plays into whether or not the investor needs to borrow money from a bank. And, with the rates being how they are, it's in like the mid sixes right now, um, that, you probably don't want to get into something where you're losing money right away, where the cap rate's 4%, 5%. Whereas someone with maybe, all cash and, seeing maybe they see the potential in this property or something, they might be more willing to get into something that has a 5% or 4% or something like that. Um, but yeah, so I think that's the basic way of evaluating a property that is for an investment. I mean, I guess on the other hand, if you're an owner user evaluating the property for yourself, it really depends on, you know, what you're using it for and the amount of money you can make by having that property. I think looking at it from that standpoint, that you might not care about what the rents are going to be because you're not renting it out.
Hmm.
I know you've
Yeah.
had experience with that as well.
Sure. And there are nuances to this. I mean, I don't want it to come across as like, oh, it's just that easy that you just, do that. I mean, you look at, for example, what are the rental rates? Like you said, if you're looking at a rent roll expenses, like, are the tenants undervalued? Like, are they under market in terms of what they're paying? Or are they over market pricing? And it might be difficult to try and get a new tenant at that level. So it's good to know kind of generally what the market rates are,
Mhm.
for tenants. And when the lease expirations are coming up, like you said, if you're going to be borrowing money or not. So there's other factors that come into it. But just at a high level, if you're borrowing money at X% from the bank and this particular investment opportunity is less than that, you could be in a cash flow negative situation and losing money every month versus cash flow positive and making money on the investment, at least initially.
Hmm. Definitely. I think another thing that plays into this that I've seen is if there isn't a renter in there and trying to look at what the rental rates are. I visited a property about a year ago that was empty, and the price was, say, it was $1 million they were asking for it. And I asked them, "Oh, how'd you come up with that price?" And they said, "Oh, we had an appraisal done." And in the appraisal, the appraiser said, these are the going rates at this time for office space, for example. And I looked at it and I just knew, I'm like, that seems really high, and looked around at what other things were going for. For example, maybe the appraiser said, "Oh, you can get $20 a square foot for office space here." And, the average at the time was $12 a square foot.
Wow.
So you had, this property that was, the evaluation was based, I think, primarily on what they thought someone could get going in there. And once we kind of ran the numbers and looked at it based on what I saw the rental rates were, they were hundreds of thousands of dollars off of what seemed right. And a year later, that property still in the market. Um, so, I'm not saying that all appraisers are bad or, throwing appraisers under the bus, but you could have one, you could have one appraisal that overvalues it based on one factor, and that can really hurt your chances of selling it or, attracting a buyer to buy it.
Sure. Yeah. And if you look at, that I mentioned net operating income. So if you have a situation where net operating income is much higher or much lower, that dramatically changes the price when you take a net operating income and divide that by a cap rate. That especially when you're dealing with commercial property and maybe larger value properties,
Mhm.
larger price properties, that difference in net operating income can result in hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in difference in pricing.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And a lot of times with that too, looking at what the current interest rates are can really
Mhm.
change, the whole aspect of the game there.
Right. If it makes sense to even purchase it or not. If your interest rate is 3% versus 6% or 7%, maybe it works great at 3 and does not work at all at 6 or 7.
Hmm.
And it's hard sometimes for an owner of a property to maybe understand that or come to terms with, wow, like okay, a few years ago it might have been worth this, but now it's not worth that based on the
Yep.
market interest rates.
Yep. Yeah. I think, you know, at a high level, that's a simple way to, try to evaluate the cost of those properties. I mean, some of the other things that come into play is, what else is going on in the area, changes in the demographics, did another similar property sell for a certain price?
Mhm.
Um, I find it hard when people, come to me and say, "Oh, what's my, I don't know, certain property worth?" And it's so much more difficult than comparing, like residential property where it's like, "Oh, let's see what another three-bedroom, two bath, 2,000 square foot home sold for in the area," where so many of these commercial properties are so unique that, it's pretty hard to find an exact duplicate. And even if you do, something that sold within the past year or two. Uh,
Definitely. Yeah. So yeah, so that's how we try and keep it simple, at least at a high level for evaluating properties. You want to move on to the second one?
yes. Yes, definitely. We got keeping it simple for offers. So let's say we found that property and we did the, evaluation and we helped our client with that and said, yes, let's put in an offer for it. Um, how do we keep our offers as simple as possible without getting too complicated into the weeds and all that stuff?
Yeah. Well, sometimes I come across offers where it's just, 4, 5, 6, 10 pages long. It's not that often, but it does happen where, the letter of intent or the offer is really complicated and um, really gets into a lot of the weeds in terms of requirements and different things. Well, I guess if it's a requirement, then it should be there. But additional additional items that are not
Yeah.
requirements, but just really verbose. And um, I think when you look at how we approach it, we try and say maybe if it's a page, 2 pages, maybe 3 pages, but really focus in on what are the key points. And if things need to be further defined, you could put that into the offer that just says further defined in a purchase and sale or further defined in the lease itself. But I think if you're um, initially presenting an offer to a seller or to a landlord, and you have all this extra wording in there, it could be that someone gets really stuck on some certain points in it, which at that level didn't really need to be in there. It could have been more about what's the price, what's the terms, what's the parking situation, and that could really um, not allow a deal to move forward. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, I think the same thing. Yeah, some of the overcomplicated, whether it be a letter of intent or an offer, um, because I think you can spend so much time, not that you shouldn't spend time crafting an offer, and a lot of times, sometimes whatever you put in these addendums can really help make or break a deal. Um, but there's a good chance that they might not even accept it because of the price. Could think of an example recently where we've been spending, a lot of time trying to put this offer together, going back and forth with the buyer, um, and we don't even know if they're even going to entertain, one, the price that they want to spend, or some of these conditions. So, um, and I think there's a good chance that they're going to come back and we're going to have to, counter and do it again anyways. Um, so not that you want to leave things out that are important to you, based on the sale, but I think, yeah, you don't have to get too complex. I know a lot of times, I've sent stuff to you to review, and like you said, it's like you can have this, a sentence or two about what they want, but then have, to be further defined in the P&S, have the attorneys work that all the details and the nitty-gritty out, which they're going to have to do anyways when we get to the purchase and sale. So
Right.
um, I think keeping it more simple, high level in the offer, and then there's less for the seller to look at and talk with their attorney about, and I think, like you said, I think the most important things are, for sale or lease, the price, coming to agreement on that, whether it be the use, if that's something allowed, or restrictions, and I think those are the biggest, and maybe the timeline or something like that, for as far as when they're moving in or when they want to close or things like that.
Yeah. Well, here's an example that comes to mind. This is going back a number of years, but it wasn't specified in a letter of intent. This is for someone leasing property, whether the tenant was going to pay the triple net expenses. So triple net being taxes, maintenance, insurance. It just, didn't specify who was covering those things in the letter of intent. And the landlord liked the offer, went to the attorneys. Now you start to have billable hours for the attorneys, and it goes further and further and back and forth on some other things. And then later on in the conversation, um, or later on timeline wise with everything, the expense part came up and said, wait, I didn't think that, the tenant was said, I didn't realize that I had to cover all of this. And the landlord said, well, no, that was my understanding, is that all my tenants, they cover this. And the deal fell apart, um, just on the basis of that. Forget about everything else. But if that was just clearly, put up front, who covers the expenses, or what the expenses are, or what the approximate triple net is, that could have saved a lot of back and forth. And maybe it would have been resolved, and have that conversation first, whether it moves forward or not. So,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And those triple net costs can get pretty expensive. I mean, sometimes it's almost like having a second rental payment.
mhm.
So maybe you go in saying, "Oh, I'm going to spend. This is great. I'm getting this place for $2,000 a month," and the triple net cost might be $1,500 a month.
Mhm.
So now you're up to $3,500, where it's almost double what you wanted to initially pay. So yeah, not having those things figured out first, or the landlord just assuming, because everyone else pays them, that figured that who else came in would just pay those as well. Um, yeah.
Yeah, great. So that was, just in terms of offers. And I know the other thing we wanted to talk about was marketing brochures, just with how we approach it.
Hmm.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I know that with our marketing brochures, we have a one main page where we try to get all the details in, um, the price, location, good users that it would be for, um, a main picture, things like that, just all, which is great because someone opens it up, you can see everything, all the details right on one page. Same thing. It makes me think of you go to a website, you don't want these websites where you're searching around for everything. You want everything right there in one page. Um, and then, second page, photos and floor plans and things like that. So I think at the most, maybe we'll have 2, 3 pages for some of ours, but the majority of it right on the front there. I think it's some of these other ones I see that we get in our email, or I'm looking around, and it starts off with a page. Maybe there's been times where I couldn't even find the address on
Mhm.
some of the front of things. I'm like, one, where is this place? And then it's like, two, okay, what's the price? Where it makes me think of I'll go to a website for a recipe, and I'll look on there, and I'm like, oh, I want to learn how to make these muffins, and then the person goes into when I was 12 and I talked to my grandmother and she went down to and I'm like, where's the recipe? And you're scrolling and and it's like, yeah, I understand they want to keep you on the page because then they got ads on there,
Right.
but you don't want that when you get a marketing brochure. When,
No.
when we send something to someone, or we go look up, it's like, I understand some people like to see, okay, what's the median age demographic of people that like to ride their bike, through the city at 4 p.m. and you have that information there. But so much of that stuff I think can be got after the fact, or look, things like that. So I think for the most part, you really need to keep those brochures as simple as possible, especially when if we're sending them out to prospective buyers or tenants,
Right.
that don't have much time. They're not going to spend 15 minutes looking over these things. Same as like if, we send this podcast out to someone and, we want to tell them what we're talking about right at the beginning because they might not spend 20 minutes listening to it to finally get to the end, be like, oh, what are these guys talking about? What's really going on here? So
Yeah.
that's my take on keeping those simple.
Yeah. Good. Well, in the spirit of keeping it simple and not having things go on and on, we should probably end this podcast right now. So,
That sounds good. But yeah, this was a lot of fun today.
yeah.
Just going through this here. And want to let everyone know if you want to reach out to us, Josh or myself, you can reach us at podcast at jmj-cre.com, or leave a message on whatever platform you're listening to, and hopefully we see it. Might have to do a better job of looking at those. But I think the best way is through the email, comes directly to us, and we respond to all of them. So with that, we want to thank you for listening. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and hope to catch you in on a future episode.
All right. Take care, everyone.
All right, bye.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the JMJ Commercial Realty podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies or positions of JMJ Commercial Realty or its affiliates. The information provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial, legal, or real estate advice. Listeners are encouraged to consult with qualified professionals regarding their specific real estate or business needs. JMJ Commercial Realty makes no representations or warranties as to the accuracy, completeness, or suitability of any information discussed. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast is done solely at your own risk. By listening, you agree that JMJ Commercial Realty and its representatives shall not be held liable for any losses or damages resulting from the use of information shared.